everyone. I'm Megan. I know a lot of you. Thanks for coming. Let's see. Sorry, my computer switched things, so I'm a little bit discombobulated, but I'll get it figured out. Thanks for coming. You all should have gotten an email with some handouts that I'll be referencing a little bit today. I may not reference them, but they can certainly be good ways for you to just support the things that we talk about today, as well as information on our website. I sent you all the link in that email. If you didn't get that email with the handouts, you can chat Connor and he will send that to you. If you have questions, you can feel free to chat Connor while I'm doing the presentation, and he'll either be able to answer them or he'll let you know that I'll answer it at the end when we do question time. When I was looking at all of you who signed up, there's a variety of professions and years represented. So this is a very general presentation, but you should be able to still take a lot from it. And really answer some of the questions you probably already have, and then it might generate more specific questions, which you're welcome to meet with an advisor for. So I will go ahead and get started. I think once my computer starts working, there we go. So things we'll talk about today is assessing when you're going to be competitive, the timeline for you applying. We'll talk a little bit about kind of weaved in throughout things that might be different or have changed because of COVID, costs of applying, which can get expensive. So sometimes it's good to just develop an awareness of that. And then we'll talk specifically about each part of the application. And so like I said, this is general, it's not specific to any one career, but all of the careers require each of these things. So it's still relevant regardless of what career you're applying to. So one of the handouts I sent was a self-assessment for figuring out when is the best time to apply, because really the best time to apply is when you are most competitive, when you are most ready. And so this self-assessment will help you to really analyze yourself and reflect on all of the different parts of your application to allow you to see like what areas you might need to work on. You're not going to show this to anyone. You're welcome to bring it to an appointment with an advisor, but you don't have to. It's really just a chance for you to reflect on each of these things. So, you know, be really honest with yourself about where you think you're at between 1 and 5. Sometimes you might want to talk to someone else and get their take and feedback on each of these areas, because sometimes, you know, the way that you feel about yourself might be different than how someone else has seen you. So you might like ask a letter writer or a friend, or kind of depending on what area you're looking at. So it's broken down to like the numbers, obviously a very important part of your application, GPAs and test scores, experiences, so things on your resume, and then a big chunk of it is your personal qualities and characteristics, as well as how much research you've done into the career, and letters of recommendation are super important. So thinking about how well your letter writers know you and what types of relationships you have with people. So, so like I said, be really honest with yourself. There's no like magic score that's like, if you reach this, if you add up your numbers and reach a certain score that you're ready to apply or not. It's like I said, it's really just an opportunity for you to reflect on the different pieces of your application. So like I said, if you have 4s and 5s, those are where you're strong. 2s and 3s are areas, 1s, 2s, and 3s are areas where you want to work on. If you only feel like there's a couple of 2s and 3s, then you still might be ready to apply. But if you have a lot of them, then that might be a reason to wait to apply. Now, if you're younger in your academic career, like if you're a 1st or 2nd year, you're going to have a lot of 1s, 2s, and 3s, and that's totally okay because you're not necessarily planning to apply. It's also okay if you are later in your academic career. It just means you might want to take more time before you apply. And you know, the average age of students starting graduate school in health professions is like 24 or 25. So don't put pressure on yourself to feel like you need to apply at the end of your junior or even your senior year. I talk to students all the time who take 2 to 3 gap years before they apply to professional schools. So don't put pressure on yourself to follow a particular timeline. You want to follow the timeline that is the one that works with your goals and where you are at. So these are some other questions that you can reflect on in terms of thinking about your future career. A lot of them have to do with connecting to other people, understanding the profession. There is some overlap with the things in the self-assessment. It's just another way of looking at it. So, you know, you want to do some analyzation and self-reflection in a lot of different ways, and whatever really resonates with you. And I have one more thing to talk about in terms of, you know, kind of reflecting on that. So you can use the tools that work for you to help you analyze that. These are all really yes or no questions, but you can also, you know, do some journaling or writing about them. Like, I can carry out a sophisticated conversation with persons older than myself. And I would say not necessarily older, but maybe more seasoned in the profession that you want to go into. So if you are applying to physical therapy school, can you carry out a conversation with someone who's in physical therapy school, as well as someone who teaches at a physical therapy school, as well as someone who is a physical therapist? So everyone has kind of different roles in that, right? So age is just a small factor in that. That kind of encompasses all of it, but really what you're looking for is like professional experience in the field that you want to go into. Being sensitive and knowledgeable of people from other cultures and backgrounds is huge. Lifelong learning is huge. I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit. And then, like I said, letters of recommendation are a super important part of the application process. I would argue that like the most important pieces of your application are, yes, your GPA and your test scores. And then also your relationships and what, you know, the strength of your letters of recommendation. Those are, like, I would say, really the top 3 pieces of your application, along with your experiences. I would say those 4. So the AAMC is the American Association of Medical Colleges. That being said, these core competencies can apply to really any profession. And again, this is just another opportunity for you to reflect on the different aspects of your application. So the interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies and communications, that's really like professionalism at its core. So like you could look at a lot of these things and be like, yeah, that's relevant to even careers outside of you know, health professions, right? Like teachers should probably like encompass all of these things, right? So it's really just like your professionalism. Again, that's why letters of recommendation are super important. Because they can really, your letter writers should be able to talk about how they have observed you in these capacities and in the ways that you have worked with them, whether it's academics or experiences. The thinking and reasoning and the science competencies tend to be more academic focused. So like letter writers from academia, your professors can potentially write in these areas, maybe as well as the professional competencies. And this is really more about like, how do you think, how do you learn, how do you analyze, and how do you communicate what you've learned? So that's really what these thinking and reasoning competencies are about. There are some things that are specific, like quantitative reasoning, so math and statistics, as well as scientific inquiry. Those may or may not be more or less relevant depending on the career that you are applying to. Now, if you're in health careers, scientific inquiry is important for all of the health careers, varying degrees of that, of course, because there's different emphases for each career, whether it's more social science based or more life and physical science based. And then within the scientific inquiry, like specific knowledge and skills in certain scientific areas. And what I like about this is it doesn't specifically say like coursework in. So it really is adaptable to all of the health professions. You need to have some background in science, both in living systems and in human behavior for all health professions. And again, the degree to which that varies is just going to be dependent on the profession. So on our website, we have some of those broken down in more detail, or all of these, sorry, broken down in more detail, as well as links to the AAMC website, where they have some very like targeted, specific reflective activities that you can do to really help you reflect and analyze your strength in these areas. So those are some 3 tools that you can use to reflect on the strength of your application. And that's something that sort of reflection is something you want to do from the beginning. So, and if you haven't, that's okay. You can start now. But it's something that you want to be doing as soon as possible. So it's never too early to start reflecting on where you're at and where you're going. So even if you're in your 2nd year coming to this presentation for the first time, just to kind of get a feel for what the next couple years are going to look like, reflection on all of these areas is really beneficial. Okay, so timeline in terms of all of the things that you want to be focusing on. So this is like there's so much to do for your application, and when do you start working on each of these things? So typically the timeline for applying takes about 2 years from the start of when you start doing things for your application, like the nitty-gritty of your application, and when you start school. So if you are applying this spring, then this would be fall and winter quarter that had just passed. Because it's the year before you apply and the year that you are applying. So you submit your application typically about a year in advance from when the program starts. It may vary a little bit depending on the profession, but typically it's about a year. It might be like 9 months, but if you round up, that's a year. So, so this would be fall and winter before you actually submit your application. So continuing experiences, making sure that you have the finances squared away for applying, taking the admissions exam. Sometimes students do that even earlier, but if you haven't, then like this is kind of the latest you want to be planning to do it. You can take it later, but sometimes that can make your application timeline just be a little bit more rushed. So this is like ideal, right? Start brainstorming and thinking about your personal statement. Though I will say reflection is never too early, so you can always start working on your personal statement even earlier. Asking people for letters of recommendation so that you're giving them plenty of time, and start researching schools, as well as thinking about what you want to be doing in the summer that you're applying. And then in spring quarter, so that would be like this time frame if you're applying this year. If you're applying next year, then this is like what you want to be thinking about doing next year. So finishing up your personal statement, finalizing it, researching schools, finalizing where you want to apply, making sure you've met all of the prerequisites, taking the entrance exam if you haven't yet, confirming everything is good to go for your letters of recommendation, and actually opening your application and starting and creating your account for your application in whatever type of server that is, which again can vary on professional. I'll talk a little more about that. So this is the quarter that you're really like just making sure everything is good to go, so that when the application opens, you can just like copy and paste into the application. So saving like resumes and descriptions for experiences and your personal statement in Word documents, so that then you can just paste it in there. And then spring, summer, fall, the application opens depending again on the profession. And so that's when you would be creating your account. And it's really important to read the instructions. I'll emphasize this more again later on, but the instructions are super important to read, specifically in both the experiences section of instructions as well as the coursework entry and transcripts. If there's only 3 sections of the instructions that you read, make it those 3, especially the coursework entry. And then once you submit your application, then it's a waiting game, and that can be kind of nerve-wracking, but it does take schools some time to review your applications and stuff. So, so you just want to, practice patience. You may have secondary or supplemental applications, again, depending on the profession that you're applying to. You can start working on preparing for interviews, even if you haven't gotten offers yet, and saving money. So, working or whatever you're doing to save money for paying for tuition. There was something else I was going to say about that, but I can't remember, so it's fine. It'll come to me. So the cost of applying can get pretty expensive. This is based on applying to like 10 or so, I believe 10 to 12 schools, and it's also variant a lot based on the profession. Not all schools have secondaries or they don't charge for them, so that could be nothing, you know. Not all schools do interviews, or if you're doing virtual interviews, then the cost may be nothing. But depending again on the profession and the school, and if they do those things, then you might be paying more. On the lower end, the cheaper professions tend to be like nursing, occupational therapy, and then the more expensive professions to apply to are like dentistry, med school, pharmacy school, because those students tend to apply to more schools in those professions, and the cost of applying is more expensive. Whereas like with nursing and occupational therapy, people tend to apply to fewer schools and the cost of applying is cheaper. Deposits are the money that you're putting down for the school to hold your spot. So once you get accepted, and the deposits will go towards your cost of tuition. These costs do not go towards your cost of tuition. They only go towards your application costs. So, you know, if you're on the higher end of this, you could be spending up to $10,000 applying to schools. And so it's nice to, you know, think about that, especially if you're like early on in your planning for applications, like start saving some money now. There is fee assistance for applications. And so I would suggest you definitely look into those and apply even if you're not eligible, because you can let them decide if you're eligible. Don't make the decision yourself if you're not eligible. As far as you know, what professions and programs, it does vary on, you know, what professions and programs offer application fee assistance. It never hurts to ask if there is fee assistance available. It definitely is available for medicine and dentistry. Other professions, it might, you know, I'm not sure if it's there, or it might be based on the school that you're applying to. With medicine and dentistry, you want to apply for the fee assistance before you register to take the entrance exam, so that then you get the cost of the entrance exam waived. You definitely want to, if you apply after that though, they won't retroactively pay for the exam. So you definitely want to make sure you apply for fee assistance before you apply, because typically what they will offer is like 10 or so schools for free to apply to. And then sometimes they include like test prep and stuff too. So it is advantageous to apply for fee assistance before you take your exam. The FAFSA is for financial aid for tuition, the cost of tuition. It opens in January of every year, and there's a deadline in March. This you wouldn't be doing until the year that you'd be matriculating. So if you're going to be starting in fall of 22, so you're applying this year to start in fall of 22, you would be filling this out in January of next year. So not this past January. Schools sometimes offer scholarships as well. They may be need or merit based. It just depends on, you know, how the school has designated the scholarships they have. And then there's also the National Health Service Corps and military service scholarships to help subsidize the cost of paying for tuition. The military service scholarships are upfront, so they pay for your tuition and you give years of service to the military. Your years of service are in the profession that you're in, so you're not necessarily doing military service that is pretty variable. You would be like working as a dentist or a physician assistant in the military, so like at a military or veterans-based hospital. The National Health Service Corps is more loan repayment focused, and so it's applying for loan repayment if you work in particular areas after you graduate from your professional program and are fully licensed. Okay, so now I'm going to transition and talk about all of the different pieces of the application. I do want to highlight our website. So let me bring that up real quick. I'll come back to the presentation. So our website, I had said under applying, all of these things that I'm talking about today, there's some more information there. So the application self-assessment, preparing for exams, info on personal statements, experiences, choosing schools, courses, and transcript. We're talking about all of this today, so our website can be an additional really great place to look into information. There's also other things in there like the blog and alumni information, and you can look at experiences too. This is where the core competencies are that I was talking about. So I would say focus on the experiences and the applying sections of the website when you're thinking about preparing to apply. And then under contact us is where you can meet with either a peer advisor or staff advisor. Okay, so back to going over each of these things. So let's see, here we go. Okay, so entrance exams. You want to make sure if it's an entrance exam that covers specific course content to take your prerequisites beforehand. Now, if you're applying to like physical therapy school and you're taking the general GRE, you know, stuff that's on in your prerequisites, it's not going to be a part of the GRE. But still sort of same timeline as far as when you want to take the test. Usually students take their entrance exams like late in their junior year or maybe their senior year. That's typically when students take their entrance exams. You want to take the exam prior to applying, and the reason behind this is so that you know your score when you apply, so that you can really do that self-assessment and evaluation about your readiness. You want to plan to do it once because schools will see your scores regardless of how many times you take it. They'll see all of the scores. So if you want to do a practice test, do a practice test like in your own time and space, not one that's going to actually be recorded. If you do not do well on your test, you can take it more than once. You just want to plan to do it once. And if you're ever unsure about or concerned about a score, come and talk to us about it, and we can help you navigate if it's worth to repeat taking it or not. As far as preparation, you want to plan to study for about 2 to 4 months, depending on your own individual timeline and readiness and comfort with the exam. There's not really any one way to study for an exam, so it's really just works best for you. So think about how you prepared for midterms and finals, and you know what sort of preparation is really beneficial for you, whether it's alone with other people. Test prep courses are great. They can be expensive. I think that they are mostly great because they provide that structure and create that structure for you to prepare for the exam, as opposed to you having to build and create that structure yourself. They offer synchronous ones and asynchronous ones. A lot of them are online. There's a bunch of different companies like Kaplan, Princeton Review, Exam Crackers, et cetera, et cetera. There's not one company that we would necessarily recommend over the other. They're all beneficial. It's just, you know, whichever company offers test prep in a way that's going to, again, work for you. The Khan Academy does have free videos for the MCAT. I think they might have them for some other exams as well. I don't know why, but probably a funding thing. They aren't going to be available past September. So practice tests, you want to take those in a test-like environment. So you want to create a space that will be as similar to what taking the exam would be like in real life or in real time. So wake up, take a shower, eat breakfast the way that you would before actually going to the test site. Take it at the time that you're registered to take it, because that's a way for you to evaluate, hey, is this working for me? Maybe like you're signed up to take the test at noon and that doesn't work for you because your stomach's growling. So maybe you need to make sure to plan to eat a different meal, or maybe you need to plan to take the test at a different time. This is something that I did in high school with preparing for one of my AP tests, and it was really, really beneficial to help me prepare for taking my AP exam. I'll never forget the test-like environment that my AP teacher created for us. So highly recommend that. The costs of exams can get expensive. Dentistry is the most expensive one, with optometry not falling too far behind that, and medicine. So those are the most expensive exams. The dates and when they're offered and how they're offered varies on the exam. So you want to make sure you go to each of the exams websites to determine registration and timing of the test. For nursing, it depends on the school, whether you would be doing the TEAS exam or the HESI. So as you're researching schools, you want to actually see which test is required. Most students, I find, kind of filter the schools that they're going to apply to based on, planning to take just one test, but you certainly could do both. You may, as a nursing applicant, also be required to do the GRE if you're applying to master's and nursing programs. And then the GRE is basically all other professions. So physician assistant, PT, OT, nursing if you're applying to graduate programs, and other health careers. So that's like the numbers stuff, but there's also more to your application, of course. And oftentimes students think like, oh, it's okay if I have like a lot of C grades because I have this really robust resume of experiences. But you really need both. And the high test scores and GPA will get you looked at. Like it'll ensure that your application is being considered, but it's not going to ensure that you get in. And it's all of the experiences that are going to get you in. And I will say that C grades aren't necessarily going to get, one C is fine, but a pattern of C's is not necessarily going to be the thing that gets you looked at. So the other things are, letters of recommendation. So like I said, this is like in my top 4 of importance for your application. So letters from faculty are super important. They can attest to like your ability to do well in academics, which is what graduate school is, right? So you really want to have some letters from faculty. Now, depending on the profession that you're applying to and the school, the amount of letters that you need from faculty may vary. Each school determines the requirements for letters on their own. So even if like you're applying to medical school and so you're like, okay, I need these letters, you want to make sure, when you're doing your school research, that you're looking at what the requirements are for letters. Typically, you'll see 1 to 2 required letters from science faculty. Sometimes professions might say that you only need 1 letter from any faculty, but some might specify science and some might specify non-science. So again, make sure you're reading the requirements for schools. 1 to 2 letters from a professional, so those aren't necessarily required, but they can be really beneficial. So if you've like shadowed someone and developed a really good relationship with them, they can speak to your potential in that career field. So shadowing a physical therapist if you're applying to PT school, and getting a letter from the person you've shadowed. But also other professionals. So like if you are working in a field that's not necessarily related because you just need to have income, that's still you developing those professional skills. Remember those competencies that I was talking about, right? That's just professionalism. And so having someone who supervised you, whether it's in something that you're paid for, like a job or community service, they can be really beneficial letters as well. The main thing is don't have a friend or a relative write a letter for you, because they have a very different relationship with you than someone who has worked with you in some sort of professional or academic capacity. You want to make sure you give letter writers enough time. Not that it takes 2 months to write a letter, but it can be time consuming to write a letter, and it's also just like can be emotionally exhausting too. Nothing against you guys, it's a lot of work to write, which you'll experience when you write your personal statement. So you want to give them time to write your letter, and to fit that in around all of the other things that they have going on in their lives. Sometimes I hear students say, oh, I asked this physician for a letter, and they said to just write the letter and then give it to them and they'll sign it and submit it. That you don't want to do because that is unethical. You also don't want to do that because, like I said, letters are super important, and the reason they're important is because it's someone else speaking on your behalf, and validating all of the things that you are saying in your application. So it doesn't make sense if you're the one validating that, because that's already in your application. You're writing your resume and your experiences and your personal statement. So you really want this to come from the voice of another person. That said, it is really helpful when someone's writing a letter to get some guidance on like what to include. So if you can provide them with some things to help them with their brainstorming process, that is really beneficial. And so you can give them a copy of your resume. You can give them a draft of your personal statement. Your personal statement that you send them does not need to be your final draft. It's just, again, to help them brainstorm. You can even just like send a bullet point list of like, these are the things that you might be, that might help you with ideas for what to talk about. If there's like a specific time that they really, that the person who supervised you was really like commending you on your work, you might point that out and remind them, hey, remember when I did this and like you had said this thing about that? Like that would be, I would love for you to highlight that in my letter. So definitely talk to your letter writers about your letter, but don't write it. So yeah. So like I said, discuss your letter with your letter writer, make an appointment with them. So there's some designated time for that, that they are giving to you. And then also when it comes to choosing your letter writers, so I mentioned, you know, not having family or friends write you a letter. Those people do know you well, but they don't necessarily know you in that professional capacity. So someone who's familiar with the activities that you've been involved in, your professional experience, academic activities, and can really provide concrete, specific examples of things that you have done and highlight those things. It does not matter what the person's credentials are. Your relationship with the person matters much more. So if I've had students say like, oh, I'm like sat on a committee with President Armstrong once. Should I have him write me a letter since he's the president of the university? And typically my answer to that would be no, unless like the student worked with them on a really regular basis, had one-on-one meetings with them on a regular basis to follow up with whatever committee work they were involved in. So don't worry about the person's title. Credentials can matter because in terms of like an instructor, yeah, you want them to be like a science faculty member, right? They don't necessarily need to be a tenured track lecturer. They could be, you know, they could be someone who's not tenure track, just someone who's instructed you, who you have that good relationship with. The confidentiality waiver is also really helpful for making your letter really strong, because it will show schools that you are confident enough in this person writing you a letter that you don't need to see the letter. And then make sure you, again, give ample time to your letter writers and send thank yous and gentle reminders because they're busy. Don't be bombarding them with an email every day, but if you check in with them like every 2 weeks, once a month, just like, hey, just reminding you of the deadlines, like let me know if you need anything for my letter, that sort of thing, that's totally fine. And thank them for sure. And let them know of your process. Like actually I wrote a letter for someone once and he never told me what the outcome of his application was. And I was really interested and invested because I wrote him a letter and was supportive of him. So let them know your process for, you know, whether you get in or not, because honestly, if you have a good relationship with someone, then they would be someone to support you if you don't get accepted. That's actually a good question to ask yourself. If you would tell this person and go to this person for advice and guidance on not getting in, then they know you well and you have a good rapport with them. So ask yourself that question to really evaluate, is this person the right person to write me a letter? You don't always need to answer that question that way, but it's a good question to ask yourself. So to put all of your letters together, the way that it works is you basically like put the letter writer's information into your application, and then the application generates an email that gets sent to them with a separate portal, so they can upload the letter confidentially so that you don't see it, but you can see if they have submitted it. So you can make sure that you're tracking the progress of your application. For allopathic medicine, AMCAS, it's a little bit different. You get a PDF that you then send to your letter writers on your own, and that has the link and instructions for letter writers. And there's no fee associated with this. There is fees associated with, like, if you want to use an outside party like Interfolio, there can be fees associated with that. So we usually don't recommend that unless there's like certain circumstances that we would talk over with you. So personal statements are not something I'm going to focus a lot on today because we have a separate workshop for that. One of them is today. So if you haven't started working on your personal statement, I would suggest going to the workshop today at 3 if you, or sorry, at 1 if you have time. If today's doesn't work, we have another time on April 23rd from 1 to 3 as well. And you can use the links on our website or in the PDF slides of the presentation that I sent you. But basically your personal statement is like the first non-metric thing that schools see, in addition to your letters, or yeah, your letters of recommendation, but they might see your personal statement before they get all of your letters of recommendation in. So you really do want to work hard on this. It's not necessarily you writing about your experiences in a way of like describing what you did. It's you writing about your experiences in a way that has shaped who you are. So that's really the difference between your resume and your personal statement. Your resume is what you've done. Your personal statement is who you are. So in that list of like quality, in that self-assessment list of ranking yourself from 1 to 5, that would be like those personal qualities and characteristics. And how are you highlighting those? And you might use your experiences to discuss those things, but you're not necessarily discussing what you did. And so the way that you do that is you use anecdotes. So you tell stories. So that's all I'll really talk about that today right now, because I would really recommend you go to our personal statement workshop where we support you in thinking about like how to think about your personal statement and then have some guided activities to help you brainstorm what you have learned and what you have gained from your experiences. There's also like information and reflective questions on our website. And if you're not able to attend one of the workshops, if you click on this link, it'll take you to a YouTube workshop that's about an hour that's pretty similar to the one that we do. Okay, so deciding where to apply can be a pretty time-consuming process. And so one thing that I really encourage you to do is to start researching schools. Like I had said in that timeline, you want to be doing this like 2 to 3 quarters before you would actually be submitting your application. I would suggest not relying on any rankings or US News and World Report statistics of schools. You may have looked at that for undergraduate. I would argue that it doesn't even matter for undergraduate, but it definitely doesn't matter for graduate school. The main thing that matters for graduate school is you finding a fit with the program. And so that requires a lot of research, both reflection on yourself as well as research on the schools. So things that you can do to evaluate that are, asking yourself these questions about the schools, the rigor, the focus, the structure. What do the faculty do? Sometimes I encourage students to like look at the faculty section of the website and see if there's names of faculty, and then like look them up in Google Scholar to see what sorts of research they're involved in, if any. What sorts of academic support and personal support is available to students. That's really how you're going to find the school that's the right fit. Geography, I would argue, is not super important in terms of fit unless you're like the most picky person on the planet. Graduate school is so time consuming that you probably won't care where you are, to be honest. That said, you also want to make sure you're in a place where you're going to be able to thrive. So schools don't really care about the geography part, so you don't want to like emphasize that in your application. Like, I'm applying here because I want to like, I'm a surfer and I want to live in San Diego so that I can have the warm water. Like, they don't care. If your interest in geography has to do with your interest in the profession, like I want to live in this community because it's where I'm from, I'm familiar with the medical needs or the healthcare needs of that community, and I want to work towards meeting those, that's a relevant geographical reason to want to apply to that school. You want to look at the mission of the program. That can also help you with thinking about your fit. An activity that I suggest to students a lot is before you start reading mission statements, write a mission statement as if you were the dean of the school that you are going to. So you're starting a new nursing program and you are the dean of the nursing program. What is your philosophy and mission? That will help you to really think about who you are as an applicant, what you value in a school, so that then when you start reading mission statements of the programs you're thinking about applying to, you can really reflect on if that's going to be the right fit for you. That can be time consuming, doing all of this research, looking at schools' websites and reading all these mission statements. So that's why you want to start researching schools early. Oftentimes when students start doing research on schools, they're looking at like, what are the requirements for letters? What are the requirements for prerequisites? Those are important. But as far as finding your fit, you want to look at like what current students are doing. So look at the current student section, the research section, the faculty section of their websites, and scour those, as well as reading the mission. And so that can take probably like maybe 1 to 2 hours per school. If you're really diving into researching the programs and reading about them. So I would say plan to research 2 to 3 schools a week. And if you start that early on enough, then you'll be able to research a ton of schools by the time you apply. So, so that's kind of some guidance on how we want to do that. We have in the handouts that I sent, there's like an Excel list that includes these and some other factors that you might consider evaluating schools on. And it's kind of helpful to have charts like that when you're researching schools. So some tools that you can use to help with deciding where to apply. Schools' websites, I mentioned that a lot. Depending on the profession, they might have like specific guides for schools. So the MSR for allopathic medical schools, the IDEA guide for dental schools, the PSAR for pharmacy, and then the CIB is the college information book for osteopathic medical schools. If you're not planning to go to one of those professions, then you're really going to rely on the school's websites mostly. And then you can also contact admissions offices. Sometimes I think it's beneficial to talk to current students. If you're not visiting the campus, then it's harder to do that. But if you contact the admissions office, say you're asking a question about like a prerequisite, like if this class that you've taken will meet a prerequisite, you could also ask the question, hey, do you have any current students that are available to talk to prospective students? I'd love to learn more about your program from the student perspective. They may say no, but it does not hurt to ask that question. Just like how Poly hires current students to like work in the admissions office, a lot of graduate programs do similar things. So it doesn't hurt to ask that question. Visiting campuses is great. It's hard when it's not COVID, it's harder when it is. So, take that with, what is available to you, but don't put pressure on yourself to do that. You can talk to us about this as well. We are going to be more general. We're not going to necessarily say, yes, apply to this school, or no, apply to this school unless it's like blatantly obvious. But we'll coach you through like how to navigate applying to deciding where to apply. Okay, so then comes the time to open your application. And like I said before, reading the instructions is super important. When it comes to transcripts, that can be like one of the complicated parts. So reading the instructions for transcripts and coursework entry is super important. That's what I'm mostly going to talk about right now. So you need to submit transcript matching forms so that like someone with a really, generic common name, like Jane Doe, not a common name, but you get what my point is, from Cal Poly and Jane Doe from University of Wisconsin, they know who is who, right? So they could use social security numbers, but because we've steered away from that and that's more of a private thing, they need some other identifier. So you get an application ID with your application, and they need to be able to have that attached to your transcript so they can attach it to the right application. So the way Cal Poly does that is you request your transcripts electronically through a system called Parchment. You can access that through your portal. And then you upload that transcript matching form to your Parchment request. If you have transcripts, so if you've attended program or taken classes at other schools, whether you're a transfer student or you just took some classes over summer, you need to send those transcripts as well. Cal Poly does not put those courses on your Cal Poly transcript. So you need to send those as well. And they might have those schools might have a different process for sending in that transcript matching form. So you need to check with those schools for how they do that. You also want to just review your application, make sure it's meeting all the instructions. That would be more towards the end. The cost of applying, so this is the initial application. The first cost in this list is for your first application. The second cost is for any additional schools. So if you're applying to 10 schools, then you would be paying $170 for the first school and then $41 for 9 schools. So 41 times 9 plus 170. So that's the cost. And it varies, like I said, depending on profession. And then this is the time when the application opens. These are the centralized application services. So like you apply to a bunch of schools with one application and then just check the boxes for the schools you're applying to. Not every school participates in the central application service. So you want to make sure that you're, again, reading the school's websites to see if they use the central application or not. Most schools are, like, more and more schools are getting on board with the centralized application. So you'll find that the majority of them do participate. Entering coursework, so going back to the transcripts thing, your coursework needs to match exactly what is on your transcripts. The reason you have to do both, entering your coursework and your transcripts, is your transcripts are a hard PDF document, and different schools evaluate and have different grading systems. So some use plus and minuses, some don't. Some have different rules for repeated courses, and so you have to enter in your coursework so that they have that information in a way to make sure that they are calculating GPAs for all of their applicants on the same playing field. Now, we all have different types of courses. Like you might have AP credit, or you might have repeated courses, or you might have done study abroad. And so that's why reading the instructions is super important, because they will give you guidance on how to enter those courses. And so make sure you read that. And it's dependent, it can vary on each profession, how you enter it differently. So make sure you read that. And again, you want your grades to match exactly what's on your transcript, because if they don't, then they will correct it. But if there's enough corrections, then they might say, we're sending this back to you to redo. So make sure it's accurate. You can request official transcripts for yourself so that you know exactly what the application services are getting. Experiences, again, read the application for instructions on how to enter your experiences, what information is needed. Typically, this is the information that you'll need for your experiences. You'll need a category, the dates that you did the experience, as well as maybe like a estimated number of total hours, information for supervisors for the role, a description of what you did. Again, it's really more focused on the what you did, not so much like who you are because of it. You might have space to include that, but again, it depends on the application. Some of them, like the dental application, you only have like 2 sentences worth of a description. For allopathic schools, you do have 3 experiences where you'll be able to describe and emphasize more of that, like what you learned about yourself. So more kind of on that personal statement type of experience, writing. As far as deciding what experiences to include, the quality of the experience is more important than how many experiences are in your application. So if you decide to meet with us, we can talk over like what might have more quality in your experiences. These are just some questions that will help you to think about how you want to articulate your experiences and reflect on them. You might not be including this in your application, but it's still good to be thinking about these. These might help you with writing your personal statement. They might also help you with preparing for interviews. So a lot of these questions are really focused on the like, what did you learn about yourself? What surprised you? They're all kind of have that same sort of tone with these questions. Did your perspectives change? How did you grow or shift? So those are really important things to be thinking about with your experiences. This last one got kind of cut off, so be mindful of my impact on them. What was the impact on you? So rather than talking about from the standpoint of like, I did this great thing, I'm so wonderful, that can kind of sound like very egoic, and like there's a God complex there. So really you want to reframe that to, by participating in this experience, how did you change? How did you grow? So what was the impact of the experience on you? For secondary applications, I know it's noon, I just realized that. If you need to go, you're welcome to. I'm going to finish because we are recording, so you're welcome to stay as well. And then if you need to go, you can come back and watch the recording. I'll be posting it to the Pre-Health YouTube site, which you can get to from our main site in the next few days. So secondary and supplemental applications may or may not be a part of your application. One of the big questions will be to describe how COVID has impacted you and or your application. So be prepared for that. Fees are common, but not always. Another very common question is why that school? So that's the thing that's specific. These are application questions that are specific to the program you're applying to. And so you really want to be thinking about that. If you do your school research really in depth from the beginning, that'll be an easy question to answer. So when you're doing your school research, ask yourself that question and maybe like do some writing and journaling on that as you're researching schools. You'll also often have a diversity question. So how have you been served as an advocate, and how are you going to an ally to individuals from different backgrounds, and how are you potentially going to bring that to the school or profession. Advisor release statements are to allow us to see the progress of your application. They also help us to aggregate the data, so the number of students who applied, what the GPAs and test scores are of our applicants who applied and were admitted. So it's helpful for us to, and where students went and where they applied. So it's helpful for us to have that information. We really only get that information for medical schools, but it's still helpful to have it for the other schools in case they ever start giving us more information. Different professions give us different information. So sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. We never share your information though, not on an individual basis, and definitely not without your permission. So it's all confidential and housed only in our office. So just to finish up some tips, mostly basically how to stay organized. So these are just some different things for tips for staying organized, keeping on top of things, dates and deadlines. Those are really important. I will say with secondaries, if you do have them, you want to get those submitted ASAP. So within 2 weeks of being offered a secondary, you want to submit it. And then this is just a recap of things. And so if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And you can either send them in chat or you can just unmute yourself and ask. And if you don't, then you're free to go.